if there was a message that you really would want to say to someone coming off the King's Fund panel?
Their staff almost certainly don't know about this stuff. When they learn about it, 95% of people want to learn more about it. Everybody who's been on the 2-hour introduction course has said, I need to know more about this. I can see the utility. And so, as a senior leader, the barriers to starting are negligible. You can start tomorrow. You will find that your staff get it, and a significant proportion of them will want to know more straight away. There is a real thirst for help in fulfilling their job role. That's what I would take away. Give people a chance to learn about this and see what dividends you get.
Okay, so what we want to talk about today is just really double down on some of the key points of what Agile actually is. And it's an umbrella for lots of different things. And at its best, it's a powerful way to help us get more stuff done, get that clarity, get that sense of shared focus. But at its worst, and we know it's overused, it's a buzzword. We're just going to make this more agile, and no one really knows what that means. And some leader likes it, and then they leave, and then everything crumbles apart. So, we want to get into the reality of where this is most useful in healthcare, where you've seen it really resonate, and where we actually kind of want to take some specific principles and practices into what we could do tomorrow. So a little blend of kind of just getting some of your experience, your journey, but also what some things that you can take away tomorrow and start working on with your teams. So, like I said, agility can be a very complex, interconnected, scaled approach that can work for teams of teams, and entire organizations. And we've seen this work in very complex organizations in a number of different industries, from pharmaceuticals to the NHS to defense, and even the nuclear defense programs. So it can be very, very complex, very helpful. But most of the time, you start and you're actually in this space. And it feels like you're in a burning room and everyone's saying it's okay, and it doesn't feel like that. We feel overwhelmed, overworked. The problem with that then is sometimes that means that we're not quite able to have the space to kind of grab onto other things that could help us and make our lives easier. And so, I think that's one of the things that we see here is this is an opportunity to really support a bunch of people across the NHS, across healthcare and public sector generally. So what is Agile? Let's just go quick an opener then. I think the reality is it is not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve everything. It's not applicable everywhere. It's not just about efficiency driving and grinding people into more and more kind of efficiency goals or process improvement. And it's not the end goal. It's not sufficient in its own right. But what it is it's structured common sense at scale. So how can we get all the things that we kind of know we should work in this way, but make it intentional and say, how do we want to work? And what it is a series of principles and practices. So some tried and tested principles from 30 years of organizational science. But then the practice is kind of like a new toolbox that can help you really do things on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. It's efficiency, it's effectiveness, and it's approval enabler to get stuff done. So when it comes to kind of what it is, what it isn't, Rob, from your perspective, what are the things that you reflect on? How does it resonate most with you? What's the value that you've seen and that you get from it?
Thanks, Fraser. The biggest thing for me is that the one thing that's in shortest demand in healthcare is really focus and attention. So anything that can help us have a shared goal, a common goal that we're all working towards. It's very difficult in complex organizations like a hospital to do anything much on your own. So the things that we need to deliver for our patients to improve outcomes and also to improve the working lives of colleagues is naturally going to have to be working together. So anything that can help us work together, help us accelerate the pace at which we deliver the things that we need to do. There's a lot of really bright people, really motivated people, really caring people working in hospitals that are currently somewhat frustrated by the way that we're working. And certainly our experience at my trust is that a few simple basic changes can actually free up some of that creativity and free up some of that energy to actually produce tangible results.
That's brilliant. And I think that's why it's interesting, because often this is associated with software development or Silicon Valley or big companies, and it's a very powerful thing that works in some of the top companies in the world, like the Apples of the world and Microsoft. But it's also in these incredibly regulated, complex spaces like SpaceX and other organizations, not just big tech, but also big manufacturing and large defense. But even that is a commercial environment where the incentives are very different, right? But I think what's most powerful and what's most interesting to work with yourself and others across the NHS is this is also getting traction in public sector areas like defence, like the NHS, because within these regulated environments, there's still ways where you can work together, you can be more intentional about how you work. And so I think one of the things that's really interesting is this connection between the front lines, whether that is in a literal military sense or corridor care, or right there in operating theatre, where we have a shared sense of focus and a shared sense of urgency, and you take a few steps away from that, and that kind of potency and effectiveness starts to diminish. And I think what we try with Agile is to try and bring some of that into the kind of day to day. So I'd be curious to know your experiences on that one.
I think it's really interesting. If you ask any clinician, certainly any surgeon, what their favourite part of their working week is, they'll tell you it's spending time in theatre doing what they're good at with a motivated team that actually produces tangible results that are unequivocal at the end of the day. There's a definite sense of satisfaction that you get after a day's operating that you don't get elsewhere. And I'm sure that's true for all my clinical and non-clinical colleagues. The hard part of the job is the stuff that you do around that, which very often feels that you're putting in a lot of effort, but your focus is distracted, your energies are dissipated, the context is constantly twitching, constantly changing, and you're switching from one activity to another. And days like that can be really far more exhausting than a day doing a whole list of operations. So if we can do anything to make life within the health service more like a clinical session, make projects that we need to run, that we have to deliver results on, more like a clinical session in any way, shape or form, I think that is something that will really land with clinical colleagues.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is one of the things that, the point of these kind of cycles that we go through in Agile, and these kind of cycles of shared focus, is very much like the scientific method. It is kind of, let's do something, let's plan to do something, let's do it, see how we go, review, and then improve, and that kind of cycle. And so I think that's some of the kind of, like I said, the potency that we've seen being quite well received across healthcare. For you specifically then, Rob, what's your journey been like? How have you become exposed to some of these principles and practices from agility?
Well, interestingly, I got into it through an interaction with a little startup project that we started to look at electronic consent. And that's something that's been knocking around for a little while. And we started a project on that. The project didn't really go anywhere. But what we did do is, in working with our software developers, is get exposed to a very simple Kanban board, a very simple Scrum board approach, where the project, which was reasonably complex, was broken down into much smaller bite-sized chunks. And because we were dissipated throughout the country, we looked at that board on a fortnightly basis, and we had 3 simple columns: to do, doing, and done. So we created a backlog of project components that we needed to work on in order to achieve our business goals. Now, the business didn't go anywhere, but it sufficiently intrigued me because it seemed a highly efficient and effective and very visible. Perhaps as a surgeon, I've got a visual memory, but I like being able to see a project laid out in front of me, and it led me to do a bit more background reading, which is where I came across Jeff Sutherland's book on Scrum, and it's caused me to get a bit more education around that. And the more I learned about it, the more I felt that it really had something to offer. So perhaps we'll touch on it later. I've used it in my personal life and my professional life for a good number of years now. One of the seminal moments really was when I came across the 10th anniversary edition of Jeff Sutherland's book on Scrum, which had a significant addition of describing the work that had been done with the Ministry of Defence from Scrum Inc. Consultants working with the MOD, and immediately the parallels with the MOD and between the MOD and the National Health Service became apparent. Obviously, we're both government departments, we're both funded in the same way, we're both insulated somewhat from commercial pressures, which comes with advantages and disadvantages. We're to a certain extent siloed in as much as many people work in healthcare and in the Ministry of Defence for most, if not all, of their careers, and we're both have absolutely critical missions and vital to the safety and health of the nation. So the fact that Scrum Inc. had done some significant work with some very, very senior members of the armed forces and were producing extraordinary results led me to attend a webinar, and I heard some really interesting things from Mike Waring, the Director of Defence Procurement, about the work that they were doing on introducing agility into the health service. So that was the way in. That was the gateway for me. Really, the major thing was so many parallels between the work that was already being done and my area of interest in healthcare.
If you're sat here watching this video saying, okay, I get the value, I get the potential of this, could give me some focus, it could help me get more stuff done, connecting with lots of cross-functional teams, and that's brilliant. But a little bit into the kind of how space now, like how do you use these? Which particular principles? How have you got this the most benefit? Is there an example in your space, Rob, where you've used Agile principles and practices that you can share with us?
Yeah, I certainly can. I think probably the best example is how we reacted to the extreme constraints during the COVID pandemic. I happen to be clinical director for general surgery at my very busy trust during that period, and it's probably difficult for colleagues to remember it, but quite how volatile the situation was, and quite how difficult it was to make any kind of forward plans during that period due to people going off sick suddenly, others being on long-term sick. It was a very difficult time to keep clinical services going. But we did adapt and use Agile, and we had some success in that, insofar as, with the limited resources we had, was to provide a safe and effective on-call emergency service. So that was something that was really important to us. It was also highly important to look after our staff, which was a rapidly dwindling number at times. We also were able, uniquely in our area, to continue to provide an elective cancer surgery service, and I'll come on to that more in a second. So we would meet on a daily basis in an office. We would have a stand-up meeting for 15 minutes at the beginning of the day to really assess what staff we had available to us, who was available for work, who was off sick, who was self-isolating, who needed rest after a busy period. And then we made a decision as to where to allocate those staff according to our list of priorities on a day-by-day basis. And that meant that we were able to not only keep our emergency service going, but send both consultant surgeons and assistants to a separate cold site to continue cancer surgery throughout the really intense part of the pandemic. And we were the only trust in the region that were able to do that. And this is not the only contribution to that, but it was a significant contribution to that continuing cancer service, and that led to the award of a Parliamentary Healthcare Excellence Award in 2022, because we were able to keep the show on the road for our cancer patients at a time when that was nigh on found to be impossible by nearly every trust in the region.
Brilliant. So just to kind of play that back then, some of the key practices that seem to give you the most benefits was daily meetings where you're coming together, that are time bound, nice and focused, and they are making work visible. So you're using that time to look at a board of some kind, and it could be post-its on a board, kind of going through priorities, or it could be, some kind of digital board. And that kind of transparency of the communications meant that you could make decisions really quickly.
Yeah, exactly that.
And then you could look at an intentional focus.
Yeah, we found it surprisingly straightforward, and we relied on flexibility. If colleagues, some of our juniors came in and we had to send them home and ask them to come back in 12 hours time to cover a night shift, and they were good enough to do that. I'm sure lots of hospitals did similar things, but what we found worked much better was doing today's work today and allocating resources according to our list of priorities. And we know that some other departments spent a lot of their time writing forward plans and rotas that got binned when the situation changed, as it did from a day-to-day basis. So we found that, in the true sense of the word, that agility that we were using on the day to pay really extraordinary dividends.
Brilliant. Okay, so if we move then from the COVID example with some kind of pretty tangible things you can go after, what are you using now? What are the kind of tools and practices that you're going after now to try and increase that kind of clarity, that focus, and get more stuff done?
Well, I think probably the best example for, and this is really has multiple applications in a hospital, with particularly with senior people who are chronically overcommitted, is the ability to do asynchronous communication, but not necessarily through email, because email is, as everybody knows, is very undifferentiated and extremely difficult for many people to keep on top of. So what we have used, and I'll give you a quick example of how we've used it on to deliver things with real speed and to really accelerate what would otherwise be a very laborious process, is that we've used an online resource called Trello. That's a free software service that enables teams to work in an agile way. So the example that we'll pull up now, and I will share my screen for you. This is a very simple Kanban board or Scrum board, where tickets are created for a number of items in a backlog, which is essentially a to-do list, and things as they're being worked on are brought into the to-do column, and then once they're completed, they're shifted across into the doing and then done. So we have tickets that can move across. So this is a very simple structure, and this is the structure that we used when we were doing our software project back in the day, and when I was introduced to the concept of agile working. So this is effective, it's very visual, it's a situation whereby everybody can easily assimilate at what stage the project is at, really in a heartbeat.
what's so great about using Trello, and it's a very kind of a common tool, like you said, it's available, it's free. You just can set up an account free of charge, and then you can share it with your colleagues, and you can all work on it. And because it's on the cloud, right, you can all kind of log in, see the same version of the truth. And that's very different from kind of classic project charter, or I've got a list over here and you've got your own list. And so that kind of shared focus is super valuable here.
Yes.
And it is kind of the equivalent, I suppose, of an online whiteboard that you're all drawing on at the same time. And so what we see a lot of value for a lot of the teams that we work with is just something as simple as like the amount of emails that this replaces, the amount of meetings that this replaces. You have one cohering central place. You can say, okay, well, we said we were going to do these things. We've got 3 of them in doing, 1 of them in done, and we've got a list of 10 things. So why is that? Oh, okay, it's because we've got someone sick. Okay, well, let's recalibrate how we want to go after that. And you also visually immediately see the workflow of any team, of any project, and I think that really makes it very simple, very easy, and it becomes a form of communication in its own right. If that makes sense.
It absolutely does. And the thing that I find, Fraser, in kind of clinical scenarios, because we all know that we help our colleagues and we want to contribute, there is a great temptation to start things and not finish them. So this gives a very clear picture of what the team is actually doing, and are they actually concentrating on the most important things, or is there a temptation to start doing too much and not actually get any of it to the point at which it's providing value when it's done. So limiting that work in progress is something that's really important. Can I show you another slide?
Absolutely.
About it? Back in 2018, the rules for, I'm a general surgeon, so I do emergency laparotomies and such like, and as I was clinical director, there was a requirement to produce a pathway in fairly short order by New Year's Eve in 2018 from the NHS. And if we didn't produce a pathway, we were going to lose a significant amount of money on each operation that we did. And our associate medical director started off with the prospect of organising a meeting of stakeholders, bringing everybody together, and as everybody knows, trying to bring busy clinicians together is now impossible. So we were on the 3rd iteration of emails about when might you be free, and we were going to miss the deadline. So I set up a Trello board and invited the relevant people to it. We eventually had the meeting scheduled by the assistant medical director, which was due to initiate the project. Because we'd worked collaboratively in this asynchronous way online, the project team were actually able to deliver to her the completed pathway at the meeting that had been scheduled to start the project. So we'd actually delivered the outcome at the time. Yeah, so we found as a team that this really sort of put rocket boosters on our ability to deliver something in good time. But there's, it is a tool. It's something that can be adapted. And if you've got a second, I'll show you how I use it in a somewhat different context, insofar as I do some medico-legal reporting, and the process of preparing a legal report, like any report or any piece of work, really is easy to break down. So, for example, if I get sent an instruction from a solicitor, it goes in my column that says can't start until I get all the information I need, and then as time goes on, I can move that through the various stages of me scheduling some time to do it, actually doing the report, dictating it going off to my secretary, and then getting typed, and then ending up as something that is actually submittable to my solicitor colleagues, so that they've got some useful output to work with. So you can use these tools, but as we've discussed on previous occasions, they are just tools, and they just support this idea of iteration, learning, moving forward in short periods of time.
Yes, I think what's great is we speak a lot about the kind of principles and the practices, and one of the principles I think you're modelling through all of these tools and the usage is the kind of transparency piece, making work visible, increasing the clarity of what we're going after together, and you don't want to keep sending 5 emails to say, are we all on top of that? We know what we're doing, what's in doing, what did we say we were going to do? But if you've got a board like that, a very visible demonstration of the work we set out to do and the flow of work that's important to you, I think that's incredibly powerful, because it does a lot of the communication and the clarity and the focus for you. And then the meetings around that, the behaviors around that, and that's the kind of special source of Agile, is that you've got a clear sense of what you're going after. You've got that backlog. And then you've got the meetings and the behaviors around that, which emphasize that. So if we said, okay, daily we're going to come and look at those boards, we're going to decide who's on what, is everyone okay with that? We're going to go then distribute and then crack on with that work. It's incredibly powerful, because then you don't need to keep checking in, because you're all clear and you're assigned. And that's so simple, But like we say, it's structured common sense. The structure bit comes in. Well, do you do that, 5 days time? Do you do that on a Monday morning, in 3 months' time? So, as much as this can be powerful and having these cycles of coming together, understanding what we're doing, updating an online board, and then going away, it is also down to the discipline. And so where's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll tell you a little story, actually. When we wrote this laparotomy pathway, I invited every possible stakeholder, and as you won't be surprised to hear, some people engaged, others didn't, and we had a couple of people that hadn't engaged in the writing process who attended the face-to-face meeting, at which the rest of the group had produced the document and submitted it. And what was really interesting is that, despite the fact that I kind of facilitated all of that, I very much took a step back at that point, and one of the consultants around the table started to almost want to relitigate the process, and the team stepped forward and said, nothing to do with it. I didn't get involved. The team stepped forward, and a few people said, no, we're not doing this again. We're not going into this again. We've decided, we've worked as a team. This is our project. We've done the work. We're happy with it. And that was quite an interesting thing. And people actually, I think it just taps into the way that people quite like to do things.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think, without boring you and the audience of the kind of the history of Agile, it has very clear origins in understanding what works on these front lines of various important areas. So medical healthcare, it tries to map out to organic systems. So the idea that this is a very human way of working is intrinsic to the power, the potency, and the spread of this way of working. It's not a magic bullet. It's not going to solve everything, but it does make us a little bit more intentional about how do we want to work. And if we can then agree, and there's some methodologies, there's some frameworks, there's some practices that are out there for sure, but ultimately you've got to choose as a team. So I think one of the things that we come into, and to make this as practical as possible, is you can use tools like Trello, Microsoft Planner, there's Microsoft Lists, there's Jira, there's loads of ways of managing your work in this kind of way. But first question is, what is the type of work we're going after as a team? How do we want to manage it? Can we get a list of all the stuff that we've got to do somewhere? And then can we make a conscious choice that maybe in the next 2 weeks or the next month, what of those things are we going to commit to? Yes. And then are we going to do it? And then at the end of that period, end of those 2 weeks, we say, right, okay, how did we get on? What worked, what didn't? And then what do we want to do for the next 2 week period? And that cycle, if we can agree some of those, when do we want to meet? How long do we want to go for before we review again? So those are some of the conscious choices that a good Scrum Master, a good coach is more than able to help you with. I think one of the things we've spoken about a lot is the kind of team agility. But when we think about organizational agility, and that could be for a whole department, could be for a whole hospital, could be for a whole trust. But when we scale this to large, complex organizations like the MOD, the key things are understanding that there's a role to shape the work. Who's the leader that's going to shape the work and be the kind of the voice of the customer or the end user of the stuff you're doing. But it's also really useful to have this role, what we call the Scrum Master. You can call it anything, the process leader, the person that just is the kind of coach of the team. And that's really useful to make those two roles very separate. Someone who's understanding why we're doing this and then understanding how we're doing it, and having those two roles constantly in kind of harmonious conflict to understand, that's what really protects teams from burnout and says, well, I know we want to go after that, but actually, how do we go after that? And we can't do that. The last 3 times we did this, the last 3 cycles, the last 3 sprints, as we call them, when we went through this loop, we planned more than we did. Well, why don't we in the next cycle maybe plan slightly less, go after that and get it done well? So these roles are really important as you start to scale across an organization, as well as things like identifying the biggest blockers. And once again, if you go through 3 loops of 2 weeks and you keep raising the same blocker, well, that's a really good opportunity for someone to take that to management or leadership to say, well, we've got this systemic thing. It keeps coming up, but it keeps blocking us. And so leadership, if you're looking at this as an opportunity, like yourself, and you imagine lots of teams working to you in this way, you've got so many opportunities to connect working teams to leadership to say, what are the biggest problems? And then we're all clear on the priorities. And that is such a unique opportunity to get that golden thread. I think that's when it scales and when it's very powerful.
I completely agree. And I think you have to go through a process. And this is certainly something that it looks from what I've learned from the MOD that they've gone through, is that you have to be okay with not being very good and not being very quick at the beginning. Because when you start measuring and you start realizing actually how little of all the various things you're committed to you're actually getting done on every fortnight or every month, that can be quite salutary. But it's important for exactly the reason that you described, because there may be systemic issues that can be addressed that are slowing the project down. And until you realize quite how slowly you're going and quite what the impediments are, then you can't seek to address any of those. So I think it is a bit of a necessary cathartic process to do that.
It is, yeah. And I think one of the things that we see a lot in healthcare is that the ability to just visualize all the stuff and then make a conscious choice. I can't do it. Okay, maybe over the quarter I've got to do all this stuff. But over the next 2 weeks, what do I consciously want to choose to do? And that really, really helps with relieving the overwhelm that we all face, and certainly frontline workers. So those are some of the things that we want to bring in, and we hope that this session can start to inspire people watching to try some of these things. So loading to Trello, think about how you can get more clarity, get more focus, get more work done by visualizing the work, having a cycle of shared focus, whether that's 1 week, 4 weeks, whatever you choose to make sense of your space, and then looping that, coming back in that time and reviewing it. And that's where I think could be valuable.
I do agree. And just to share with you the feedback that I've got from colleagues in a variety of disciplines, such as pharmacy and physiotherapy, the number of times that people who've learned a little bit about this and have implemented it immediately have found that they've emailed me and said, this has reduced my feeling of overwhelm with the massive amount of work that's coming my way. Simply creating a backlog, getting some clarity on the competing issues that they've got to address, and realizing that they're not Superman or Superwoman, and they can actually decide what's most important and address that in a structured way. They found it immediately useful, and that's something that I wasn't expecting to hear, but people tell me quite frequently.
Yeah, no, and that's brilliant, and that's exactly so critical at this point in the NHS when we're looking to do more with less, to get further where we can. I think it's an incredible part of the mission. It's a big part why we're here. And I think if you're asking yourself, well, that's great, what does that mean? We're trying to give you some tools today through this conversation to kind of things that you can take back tomorrow and start using with yourself, with your teams. If you're thinking about, well, how do we get a team together and how do we manage that? And what does that look like? Or what could that look like, a series of teams? These questions are exactly the kind of things that we want to talk through. And we're more than happy to follow up with the discussion. So if there is something you'd like to follow up with, obviously, please be in touch. And myself or Rob are more than happy to kind of field some of these questions and share some of the learnings and some of the opportunities from across public sector. But yeah, thanks very much for your time, Rob. Really appreciate that.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you, Fraser.
If there was a message that you really would want to say to someone coming off the King's Fund panel?
Everybody who's been on the 2-hour introduction course has said, I need to know more about this. I can see the utility. And so, as a senior leader, the barriers to starting are negligible. You can start tomorrow. You will find that your staff get it, and a significant proportion of them will want to know more straight away. Yeah, and like I say, we've got people saying, I've set up 3 Trello boards. I've got somebody else said, I've ordered myself a whiteboard. I'm going to do, when are you going to do something, to follow up on this? I need more time. I want to do more. So once they hear about it, and in the context of their job, not in abstract terms, they want to learn more. That's what I would take away. Give people a chance to learn about this and see what dividends you get.